is taken from Matthew chapter 14, starting at verse 13. When Jesus heard what had happened, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. Hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from the towns. When Jesus landed and saw the large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed those who were ill. As evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a remote place, and it's already getting late. Send the crowds away so that they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food." Jesus replied, "They do not need to go away. You give them something to eat." "We have only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish," they answered. Bring them here to me," he said. And he told the people to sit down on the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the people. They all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. The number of those who ate was about 5,000 men, besides women and children. Richard has asked me to tell you something that happened to me many years ago now, when I lived in a Christian community in Northern Ireland. I lived in a house, we had a chalet as well, with 4 other couples, and Charles as well, of course. And and during the day, the parents were very busy, and so I looked after the 6 children. First thing in the morning, I always got ready something for lunch, and I just made a little bit of soup, and I'd only got 1 loaf of bread, so I knew that we would be about 10 people for lunch, and so I cut the loaves into 10 pieces and put them into a box, so I was ready to serve whenever it was time. And that very morning, we'd actually had this story that I've just read to you. We used to have a Bible story every morning before we started playing and doing other things. One of the little boys has said to me, "Sister Pam, do you really think it really happened?" And I said, "Look, Jesus performed so many miracles that I'm certain it did." He said, "Do you think it could happen today?" I said, "Well, I don't know that my faith is strong enough, but I believe it could with Jesus in charge of our lives." And then we went playing, we were doing various numbers and all sorts of different things. And it came to lunchtime, so I'd heated the soup up and the children were just starting to sit round the table when there was a knock on the door. And in came about 9 or 10 young people from across the road where the community was, saying that Graham, the man in charge, had sent them over to have lunch. My comment was, "Well, I wish I'd have known." But anyhow, I thought, well, I've only got 10 slices of bread and this small amount of soup. But, Lord, you're in charge. We had the story this morning, so I'm looking to you. So we got out all the bowls and everything ready, and I started serving. I never looked in the saucepan, I daren't. I never looked in the box of bread, I daren't. But I just kept going. And every time I took a ladle of soup, I said, 5 loaves. And then I took 2 fishes. 5 loaves and 2 fishes. I kept saying it the whole time. Well, about 20 of us had had out of my little amount of soup. And they all said, "Can we have some more?" I said, "Yes, why not?" And kept going. 5 loaves and 2 fishes. I daren't look. I never looked in the saucepan or the box once because I knew there was not enough. But God supplied. And you know, right at the very end, I realised that we'd had over 30 ladles of soup out of that bowl. and we'd had 30 bits of bread, and there was only one small loaf because that's all I got in the house. But you know, God had supplied. Our God is a God of wonders, of miracles, if we just trust him. Over to you, Richard.
Hi, everyone. It does feel like it's back to school, doesn't it? With this here, it's kind of more for my benefit than anything. It just helps my thinking. So there's a reason that I'd heard that story years ago, actually, but it's always stuck with me. And over kind of recent months, maybe over the last year, there's been kind of rumblings of the Spirit, hasn't there? There's been kind of whispers of awakenings and revivals and God on the move, and that to me is very exciting, and it's kind of led me to be something. I'm setting my timer, so I'm not forever. It's kind of led me something to be a bit of an armchair historian on revivals, and one of the signs that a revival is coming is that we start hearing stories like that and we start believing that it could happen again. We start believing that God could move again. The stories that we've all probably heard, you know, if you haven't heard, ask around. But I'm sure at least there's lots of people in the room that could think of a story that has happened to them where something miraculous has happened, or they've heard of something that is miraculous has happened. And what kind of when I was looking at this, and again, like Dan said, you know, if you've been around Christian circles, you've heard this story before. But what would happen if we started believing that something like this didn't just happen 2,000 years ago? It could happen now. It could happen again. It could happen in Huddersfield. And so that kind of got me thinking, and it's hard for me to think just in my head. So I'm going to write some stuff down. So I'm not a very good writer. You're going to have to deal with it. So I started with Jesus is going around and he's bringing the kingdom. That's what he's doing. Through most of the Gospels, that's what he's doing, is bringing the kingdom. However, our passage for today starts with when Jesus heard what had happened. So it probably makes sense to kind of give a bit of context as to what actually did happen. So context is his cousin, John the Baptist, thank you, has just been beheaded. Fairly brutal. And Jesus, what's happened in the beginning of Matthew 14, has gone away to a solitary place, I imagine, to grieve, to pray. I actually learnt this from The Chosen, so it's not a knowledge I learnt from the book, but apparently it's a Jewish custom that when you're grieving, that you go away for 2 weeks to sit something called Shiva, which is a 2-week mourning period of essentially not doing much work, just getting away and giving yourself time and space. And, you know, that's a really good custom. But what happens is, word gets out that he's gone away, and a crowd comes to him. And the passage says, sorry for the patriarchalness of this, but 5,000 men, besides women and children, come. So in my estimation, that's at least 10,000 people. At least. So you've gone away, you're grieving, you're trying to process, you're trying to get some space, you've gone to a solitary place, and 10,000 people show up in your solitary place. How are you going to react to that? And do you know, I've got a bit of raw experience of that, because I've recently, and I'm still going through a grieving process. I recently lost my mum. And so I can kind of put my head in this place, I can kind of understand the need to get away and the need to sit and the need to process. And I have my favourite spot up on the moors. I'm not going to tell you where it is. And I like to go there to process, and I've been there. If 10,000 of you had have showed up when I'm going through that, my emotional reaction would have not painted me in the best light, put it that way. But as we read in our passage, Jesus looks out in his grief and sees 10,000 plus people coming towards him, and it says he had compassion on them. That's just amazing for me, isn't it? And there's a pattern forming. That when Jesus and his kingdom shows up, it shows up with compassion. And you see that kind of again and again. It shows up with compassion. When Jesus and his kingdom is starting to be on the move, it starts with compassion. If we're going to start to see pots of soup overflowing again and tubs of bread overflowing again, then I think part of it is going to start with compassion. Not necessarily our compassion. It's going to start with the compassion of Jesus and his coming kingdom. And there's an interesting kind of there's a handwritten. This is the first sermon I've ever done without the internet. You know. Anyway, there's an interesting kind of word used, Hebrew word used for the word compassion here. Thank you, Bible Project, for teaching me this. So the Hebrew word Matthew uses is rachamin. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that right. Which is to have compassion. It's like a verb, kind of a doing, kind of you're having compassion. The adjective would be rachum. That is to be compassionate. God is compassionate. You would use the word rachum. I'm going somewhere with this, I promise. Now, rachum has really strong connotations with the word rachem, which is the word you would use for the womb, a mother's womb. In other words, when Matthew is saying, when Jesus saw the crowds, he had compassion on them, what he's saying is the emotional response that Jesus is having to seeing this crowd of people is something akin to what a mother would feel for a child growing in her womb. Now that is a lot of compassion. And this is a man who's grieving. You know, my emotional reaction would probably be irritation and frustration, anger maybe even. But no, Jesus looks out at this crowd and he sees his children. And I think there's an interesting thing that we probably don't have time to go into today of his children waiting to be born. I think that's interesting. It's a rabbit hole for another day. So what does Jesus' compassion look like? What happens when Jesus' kingdom and his compassion starts to break through? Well, first thing, he healed the sick. And I thought this was interesting. It just kind of popped at me because we're talking about eating with the crowds and we're talking about eating. So my attention was kind of going towards the eating bit. And I kind of almost skipped across there. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them and healed their sick. And then I had to go back to him and hang on a minute. He healed their sick, but it doesn't say like he healed a few sick. He healed 5 people, he healed 10 people. It just says he healed their sick. So I'm guessing what's implied there is he healed all of them. Everyone that was sick, indiscriminately, he healed their sick. So again, emotionally, back in the place. Your cousins died. People were close. Families were much close-knit back in those days. He probably grew up with John the Baptist. And it's John the Baptist has just died and he's grieving. 10,000 people show up. His emotional reaction is not, go away. It's, I love you. And he sees people who are poorly, who are sick. And his action, what his compassion looks like is, he healed them. That is pretty amazing. My head was just, well, there's one miracle here. It says it in the Bible, Jesus feeds the 5,000. But no, there's many miracles in here. One of the first miracles is that he had compassion on them. And then he heals their sick. So, the next thing that happens when Jesus' kingdom starts to break through is people get fed. We've looked loads and loads. This is the last kind of bit on Jesus eating with the crowds. But Jesus spent a lot of time eating with people. And I think he ate with people for lots of reasons. You know, he was challenging cultural norms by eating with people. He was eating with people who weren't of his class. He was eating with people that you shouldn't be eating with. In the Middle East around this time, and still in some parts, who you break bread with says something. It's a powerful statement. If I'm going to eat with you, if both our hands are going to go in the same pan, the same pot, then what I'm saying is we're equals. You and me, we're worth the same. We're family. We're in it together. So it's challenging that. It's challenging like purity laws that had gone a bit off track, that had gone wayward. He's challenging all of that stuff. He's including people. But I think there's something really easy to miss in all of this. Maybe really easy to miss for a fairly wealthy Western person. And that is, they were actually hungry. This isn't some sort of, it's not necessarily a political statement or a religious statement. It's a down to earth. These people are actually hungry. And, you know, to put our heads back in the time frame that this was, there isn't an Asda around the corner. There isn't, you know, it's food is more valuable than money. And food is a really, really valuable resource here. And Jesus knows this. And he feeds people. So in Jesus' kingdom shows up, it shows up with compassion. People start to get healed. And people start to get fed as well. So, the third thing that I'm coming up with, that I'm seeing, is I didn't actually plan this before I knew this was commissioning Sunday. But, and I'm kind of inferring this, it doesn't say this explicitly, but it says, but there's a pattern in other stories of the Bible. Jesus shows up, his compassionate kingdom comes, people get healed, people get fed, and people grow in wisdom. I'm assuming, because it's getting late, that he's been hanging out with these people. And there's been some element of teaching in that. I'm assuming that. It doesn't say that explicitly in this passage. But if you look at other stories of the Bible and the things leading up to this, it's hard for me to imagine Jesus not helping people grow in wisdom. I avoided the word teaching or educating because it wasn't always about do this, don't do this, do this, don't do this. It was about growing in wisdom of just sit with me. Just come and hang out with me. Just come and sit with me. Learn, as Eugene Peterson would say, learn the unforced rhythms of grace. That doesn't necessarily mean listen to what I'm saying. It means watch what I do. Come hang out with me. Come be with me and see that your worldview expands a little bit. And you can start to see. And I kind of saw this pattern coming, just popping out at me from the passage. So Jesus comes. He comes in compassion. He heals. He feeds. And he grows. And he helps people grow in wisdom. I see this kind of pattern all again. There's a parallel in the Old Testament. It's a huge, well, the Old Testament's a big book. It's a long story, and I didn't want to kind of just pull out little bits because it wouldn't make sense. But there's a story of the Israelites get liberated from slavery in Egypt, and they're in the wilderness, just like this when we're feeding the 5,000. Both wilderness-type moments. And over a longer period of time, the people in the wilderness have God's compassionate kingdom presence come. And there's a story of people getting healed from snake bites. There's a bronze serpent, and God instructs Moses to put it up on a staff, and people get healed. People get fed. Manna comes down from heaven to feed the people, and people grow in wisdom. God provides them with the Torah, the law, which helps them grow. And this pattern for me seems to come about again and again and again and again. When God's compassionate kingdom comes, people get healed, people get fed, and people grow in wisdom. And I don't kind of ever want to skip some of this stuff. It's easy because I'm a guy that's kind of fascinated with wisdom stuff. That's where I find home. Love the wisdom literature. Love Ecclesiastes is my favourite book of the Bible. That kind of tells you quite a lot about me. But people aren't going to listen. People are going to struggle to accept and receive the gift of grace if they're sick and they're hurting. And this is a line, I think Ness was quoting somebody else on the weekend away, but I'm giving it her, I'm attributing it to Ness Wilson. Said, it is hard to warm someone's heart for Jesus if they have empty stomachs and cold feet. And that hit me quite hard, and it's kind of stayed with me for quite a while. Of not us, we're actually pretty good at it in this church, but just in general, do we lose something in our faith when we go straight in with, hey, you heard about Jesus, let me give you this Bible, let me teach you what the Trinity is, all that sort of stuff. If anybody can teach what the Trinity is, let me know. But if you look at Christian history, and specifically Christian revival history, some of the real tangible effects of God's kingdom coming through is that people get healed. I don't know if anyone's ever read the book Dominion by Tom Holland. Great book, but it's a great book. He wasn't a Christian. I think he is now, but he wasn't a Christian when he wrote that book. And he attributed the rise of the early church, early Christianity, to when a plague hit Rome. So a plague hit Rome, people start getting sick, people start dying, all the rich people pack off and go off to the country houses. Like, we're out, we'll come back when it's all good again. The Christians run into the burning building. They run into the burning building, and people got healed. People started getting healed, and people started getting fed. The hungry people started getting fed, and they grew in wisdom. Dan mentioned, it's Commissioning Sunday, it's 1st of September. Do you know why we start schools on the 1st in September? Because that's when the liturgical calendar starts. That's when the church calendar starts. The reason why that the whole school system coming from the university was actually based on Christians coming into this country and converts happening in this country and saying, how do we help people? We're going to help heal people, we're going to help feed people, and we're going to basically invent the school system. It started from Christian revivals, is basically at the heart of education. We start our calendars in September because that's when the traditional church started their liturgical calendars. So these are deep roots, and these are signs, tangible signs, not just the feelings, which I'm all for. I'm really all for the feelings and the ecstasy of worshipping together and really feeling the felt presence of God. But the sign for everybody outside this building, the sign for the people in Granby Flats, and the sign for our community, and the signs for Huddersfield and the world, when God starts to move, it's not just going to be us being a holy huddle feeling good about it and feeling like, oh yes, we got proved right all along. That's not, I don't see it that way, and I don't think God sees it that way either. The people outside looking in are going to start to see that revival is on its way and God is on the move when we start to see people getting healed. And that might look like sickness being healed. That might look like mental health being healed. That might be some undiagnosable, undefinable feeling of lack and dread that you've been carrying around starts to get soothed and settled. It looks like hungry people being fed. I really can't stress that enough. You know, it's going to be a rough winter for a lot of people. And a sign of the kingdom coming is that those people are going to get fed. And growing in wisdom, you know, it's of course, this is my bag, isn't it? But they say knowledge is power. Not sure I like that saying, but knowledge, it helps. It helps in the healing process. Growing in wisdom helps you see through the difficulties of life. It helps you to see the bigger picture. I'll put it that way. So, you might not be able to see this, but I'll try. So, I'm going to say that's us, because I don't know how to write it. And just like this crowd, we come to meet Jesus. Hopefully that's what you did today. Or you might have just come for a cup of coffee, I don't know. But you can meet him anyway. And Jesus' compassionate kingdom comes to meet us. We go to meet him. These, I think, are the signs that happen as a result of this. And the last bit that I want to kind of tie all this together and how I'm going to land this thing is you see a bit of a dynamic with the disciples, or I do. Maybe I could be kind of reading myself into this, but I don't think I am. And it's this feeling that we can have. I certainly feel it. I feel it right now, if I'm honest. A feeling of lack, a feeling of not being quite good enough, a feeling of not being up to the challenges. And there's something in this of evenings approaching, when disciples are seeing the needs of the people out there. And heaven knows, if you've looked out at the world out there, it's a world crying out for God. There's a need for God. But there's a feeling that we're not up to the task. And here's a trick to give the devil his due. He's a trick here, because the best lies are almost true. And it's be easy to whisper in your ear and go, yeah, you're not up to it. You ain't got enough. You've got to feed 10,000 plus people. You've only got 5 loaves and 2 fish. You are not enough. And the thing is, there is a little bit of truth in that, because if it forgets this bit. Because it's not about, in this passage, it's not about what you don't have. It's about what do you have. Because if you bring that to God with trust, could be another word for faith, I think we start to see this happening. I think that's what we're seeing in the Bible. I think we see it again and again. There's a story, isn't there, in Mark 16, I'm going to say, but don't quote me on that, where there's a widow, and Jesus is watching these people, and they're coming and they're giving their fancy offerings and all of this sort of stuff, and she comes, and being a widow in those times is financial suicide, essentially. Not suicide, because you didn't do it to yourself. It's not a great place to be, basically, put it that way. In a patriarchal society, it's really hard for women to make money. But she comes and she gives her last 2 coins. But God sees that and he goes, I can work with that. I can work with that. And so I said I was going to end. I'm going to end like 3 times. Jesus' compassionate kingdom is on the move. It's on the move. And we're starting to feel it. We're starting to get the sense of it. I think the things to look for is people getting healed, people getting fed, and people growing in wisdom, godly wisdom. And if we can trust in him, if we can step out in faith, and not think about, I don't have this, I'm not quite there yet, I'm not good at this, I'm not good at that, I can't do this. Instead, flip that. Think, okay, well, what have you got? What have you got? Maybe all you've got that day is a smile for someone. God can work with that. God can really work with that. You could save someone's life with a smile. I genuinely mean that. So, we're going to take bread and wine, or bread and juice, soon. And as we come and receive it, I want you to get to that place in your head of being in the crowd in this place that comes towards Jesus. Maybe you need healing. Maybe you're hungry. Maybe there's something that irks you, that you don't understand, that you can't wrap your head around. I'm not saying you're going to get the answer, but allow Jesus to grow you in the wisdom to sit with that for a while and trust him. Because when your trust comes to meet his compassion, family, friends, we're in business. When that happens, when that's touched, when your trust touches his compassion, we've got a move of God on our hands. And so, if the stewards, wherever they are, want to start putting the tables where they want to put them, and just spend a few minutes in your heart recognizing that this is a God who loves you. Who loves you like a mother loves her child in her womb. He loves you that much. Allow yourself a few moments to soak yourself in that compassion. Allow it to well up in you. Allow it to flow in you and flow through you. And then as we go out to face the crowds in schools or our workplaces or wherever you will be tomorrow morning, allow that compassion to stay with you, overflow, and see, look, hear, and see, is there someone that needs healing? Under the authority of Jesus, you have the authority to pray for healing for that person. You have the authority to pray that that person gets what they need, gets the provisions they need. And as we've heard, maybe you have the power to actually feed them. Maybe you have something for them to help them grow in wisdom. That might look like telling them a story. It might look like sharing a testimony. It might look like shutting up and listening. Either way, let's do that. And I'm going to finish by praying for you. I'm going to start by reading something from Isaiah. So close your eyes and picture that if you can. If it's a difficulty, don't worry about it. So come, all you who are thirsty, and all you who have no money. Come, buy wine and milk without money and without cost. Come and drink of my compassion. Come and let me heal you. Let me feed you. Let me teach you. Let me help you. Trust me. Jesus, help us trust you more. Help us experience your compassion more. In Jesus' name. Amen. Thanks, everyone.